In a quiet village, young Thalion finds an ancient sword in his father's forge after the funeral. As he holds the sword, feelings of power and glory fill his mind, clashing with the simple life he has always known. The villagers gather to mourn, whispering old stories about the cursed blade. Thalion struggles with his father's lessons of humility and responsibility, questioning whether he is truly worthy of the sword's mighty power. Little does he know, dark forces are about to change his life forever. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village of Elden Hollow. A heavy silence filled the air as Thalion walked through the familiar paths, his heart weighed down by grief. The funeral of his father was barely over, yet the village felt different. The laughter of children seemed distant, and the warmth of familiar faces felt cold. In his mind, he replayed the last moments he spent with his father, the man who had forged not only tools, but also a legacy of humility and strength. As he approached the forge, a flicker of curiosity broke through his sorrow. The forge stood as a monument to his father's life, filled with the scent of iron and smoke. Thalion felt an urge to step inside, to touch the tools, and remember the lessons he had learned. But as he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. There, resting on a wooden stand, was a sword unlike any he had ever seen. Its blade shimmered with an otherworldly light, and intricate designs snaked along its hilt. Thalion stepped closer, his heart racing. "What is this?" he whispered, reaching out to grasp the weapon. The moment his fingers wrapped around the hilt, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling him with visions of power and glory. He saw himself standing tall, commanding respect and admiration. But then, the images shifted, revealing chaos and destruction that haunted his mind. "Thalion!" A voice called from outside, snapping him back to reality. It was Aaron, a neighbor and friend, along with a group of villagers gathered at the forge to pay their respects. Their whispers filled the air, speaking of the cursed blade that had once belonged to a great warrior. "They say it brings only sorrow," Aaron warned, glancing nervously at the sword. "Your father would not have wanted you to touch it." Thalion's grip tightened around the hilt as doubt crept into his mind. He remembered his father's teachings about being humble and responsible. "But what if it's meant for me?" he thought, wrestling with the allure of the sword and the weight of expectation. "Am I worthy of such power?" The villagers' murmurs grew louder, and he could feel their eyes upon him, filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Thalion, you should leave that thing alone." Lyra, his childhood friend, stepped forward, her brow furrowed with concern. "It can lead to darkness. You know what happened to those who sought power." He turned to her, seeing the worry etched on her face. "You don't understand, Lyra. This sword could change everything. It could protect our village." The words spilled out before he could stop them, revealing his inner conflict. Lyra shook her head, her voice firm. "But at what cost? Power is not the answer. We were raised to value community and kindness, not to chase after glory." Her words struck a chord deep within him, yet the sword beckoned him, whispering promises of greatness. As the villagers continued their hushed conversations, Thalion felt a storm brewing within him. The sword's temptation loomed larger, a shadow over his heart. Would he follow the path of ambition, risking everything his father had taught him? Or would he turn away from the darkness that threatened to consume him? In that moment, Thalion stood at a crossroads, holding not just a sword, but the weight of his father's legacy and the expectations of his village. Questions swirled in his mind like leaves caught in the wind. Could he balance the desire for power with the responsibility that came with it? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forge in a fiery glow, Thalion knew one thing for certain. The choice he made next would shape his destiny and the fate of Elden Hollow forever. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the village, whispers of an impending invasion filled the air. Thalion stood at the edge of the village square, his heart racing with a mix of fear and confusion. The villagers were gathered in small groups, their faces etched with worry. News of mercenaries approaching spread like wildfire, igniting panic among the people. "Did you hear?" a woman said, her voice trembling. "They say a band of mercenaries is coming this way. They want to take everything from us." "Stay calm," replied an elder, though his own hands shook. "We must prepare for whatever comes." Thalion felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The sword, still heavy in his mind, seemed to call out to him, its dark allure growing stronger with each passing moment. He turned away from the crowd, seeking solace in the familiar face of his childhood friend, Lyra. "Lyra," he called, spotting her near the edge of the square. She looked up, her eyes wide with concern. "Thalion, have you heard the news?" she asked, rushing to his side. "Yes," he admitted, glancing around at the gathering villagers. "I don't know what to do. They're saying we need to fight." Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "We have to defend our home, but we must be careful. There is so much at stake." He hesitated, his mind racing. "I found the sword, the one my father left behind. I can feel its power, Lyra. It's like it wants me to use it." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Thalion, you know what they say about that sword. It holds darkness. Using it could change you. It could destroy you. But what if it's the only way to protect our village?" Thalion argued, frustration creeping into his voice. "What if I could save everyone?" "By risking your soul?" Lyra asked, her voice firm. "We were raised to value humility, not power. You need to remember that." Thalion looked down at the ground, battling the storm inside him. He remembered his father's teachings, the lessons about responsibility, and the weight of choices. But the temptation of the sword felt like a fire that burned within him, growing hotter with every moment of fear around them. "We have to prepare," Lyra said, breaking through his thoughts. "Gather the villagers. We'll need weapons, food, and a plan. We can't let fear take over." With a reluctant nod, Thalion joined Lyra as they moved through the village. They spoke to the elders and the strong men and women, organizing a defense. Thalion felt the weight of the sword's presence in his mind, whispering promises of strength. As night fell, the villagers worked together, their voices rising and falling in a chorus of determination. Thalion tried to focus on their efforts, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the sword. He could almost feel it vibrating with energy, urging him to give in to its call. "Thalion, are you with us?" Lyra's voice broke into his thoughts again. "Yes, I am," he replied, though he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. "Remember, we need each other. No one can face this alone," she reminded him, squeezing his arm gently. They finished their preparations, but as Thalion lay in bed that night, sleep eluded him. The village felt heavy with anticipation, every creak and whisper echoing in his mind. He stared at the ceiling, thoughts racing. Finally, he sat up, heart pounding. "What if the sword could help us? What if I could control it?" he whispered to himself, his resolve wavering. But deep down, he heard Lyra's warning. The sword was a temptation, one that could lead him down a dark path. As he lay back down, he closed his eyes, hoping for clarity. Yet, in the shadows of his mind, the sword continued to whisper, promising power, glory, and the strength to protect those he loved. And as the wind howled outside, Thalion knew that the storm was not just coming from the outside, it was brewing within him as well. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village, Thalion felt an insistent pull toward the blade. The weight of it at his side was comforting, yet troubling. He had seen the fear in the eyes of the villagers, the whispers that followed him, and he knew he had to act. The mercenaries were not far, and the village needed a hero. In a moment of weakness, he decided to test the sword's power during a skirmish. The clash began suddenly, the air filled with shouts and the clash of metal. Thalion gripped the sword tightly, feeling its energy surge through him. He dashed forward, the blade dancing in his hand, slicing through the air with ease. The power was intoxicating, a rush that filled him with confidence. He could feel the energy of the sword amplifying his every move. "Thalion, wait!" Lyra yelled from behind him, her voice laced with panic. But the sound barely registered as he charged into the fray. With each swing, Thalion felled mercenaries like wheat before a scythe. It was exhilarating, the thrill of victory flooding his veins. But with each fallen foe, a sharp pain echoed in his heart. He could feel the souls trapped within the blade, their cries mingling with his triumph. "Stop! You're losing yourself!" Lyra shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. Thalion hesitated for a moment, glancing back at her. She stood at the edge of the battle, her face pale and filled with concern. In that brief pause, he felt the weight of her gaze, the worry etched into her features. But the power surged again, and he pushed the thought of her aside. "I can't stop now, Lyra. They are attacking our home," he called back, his voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. As the last mercenary fell, Thalion stood amidst the chaos, breathing heavily. The villagers began to cheer, their voices rising in gratitude and admiration. They rushed to him, clapping him on the back and lifting him high. "Thalion! Thalion! Our hero!" they chanted, and for a moment, he felt invincible. Yet, beneath the cheers, a gnawing guilt settled in his chest. He turned to see Lyra standing apart, her arms crossed and her expression grave. She stepped forward, breaking through the crowd. "Thalion, you can't let this power consume you. Look at what you've done," she said, her voice low but firm. He felt a wave of defensiveness rise within him. "I saved them, Lyra. I protected our village." "By sacrificing your own soul?" she countered, her eyes searching his. "You can't ignore the lives taken by that sword. You may have won this battle, but at what cost?" The cheers of the villagers faded into the background as Thalion met her gaze. He remembered the pain he felt with each swing, the whispers of the souls merging with the blade. "I didn't want to lose," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could control it." Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening. "You are stronger than that sword, Thalion. You don't need it to be brave. You need to remember who you are." The words struck him like a cold splash of water. He took a deep breath, the reality of the situation settling in. The blade felt heavier at his side, its allure no longer shining bright, but dimmed by the darkness it carried. Maybe I do need to think about this," he said slowly, looking down at the sword. "But what if we face them again? What if I am not enough without it?" Lyra reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are enough. You always have been. You just have to believe in yourself, not in the sword." The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and profound. Thalion felt a flicker of doubt mixed with the guilt, and for the first time, he began to question the path he had chosen. The villagers still cheered around him, but the victory felt hollow. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Thalion stood torn between the admiration of the villagers and the nagging guilt that clawed at him. He had tasted power, but it left a bitter aftertaste that he could not ignore. The air in the village grew thick with tension as Thalion's ambition began to overshadow the bonds he once cherished. The sword, once a symbol of hope, had transformed into a weight he could not bear. He trained relentlessly, pushing himself to become stronger. But with each passing day, he pushed away those who cared for him, including Lyra. "Thalion, you need to stop this," Lyra said one afternoon, her voice laced with worry as she watched him practice in the field. "You are losing yourself to the sword. This isn't who you are." Thalion paused, the blade glinting in the sunlight. "You don't understand, Lyra. With this sword, I can protect our village. I can make sure they never suffer again." His eyes were wild with a fierce determination, but Lyra saw the shadows lurking within him. "Protecting them doesn't mean becoming a monster," she pleaded, stepping closer. "You have to remember your father's teachings. He wouldn't want this for you." "Enough!" Thalion shouted, anger bubbling to the surface. "He is gone. I have to do this my way." He could feel the power of the sword coursing through him, intoxicating and overwhelming. He couldn't let go of that feeling, even as Lyra's face fell with disappointment. The days turned into nights, and the villagers' fear of the mercenaries grew. Thalion spent more time training, his heart racing with the thrill of power. He began to ignore Lyra's warnings, convinced that the sword was his only path to victory. The night before the final battle with the mercenary leader, he sat alone in his room, the sword resting beside him. As he stared at the blade, Thalion's mind was filled with visions of glory and destruction. He could see the mercenary leader, a towering figure with a cruel grin, mocking him. "You think that sword makes you strong? It will be your downfall," the vision sneered. But then, another image flickered in his mind, a memory of his father smiling down at him, his gentle voice saying, "Strength comes from within, my son. Always choose kindness over power." Thalion shut his eyes tight, trying to push the memory away. Suddenly, a soft knock broke through his thoughts. It was Lyra, her eyes filled with concern. "Thalion, can we talk?" He hesitated, but finally nodded. She entered, her presence a soothing balm against his inner turmoil. "I know you feel the weight of the village on your shoulders," she began gently. "But this path you are on, it will only lead to pain." Thalion looked away, struggling with his emotions. "I can't let them down, Lyra. If I abandon the sword now, what will happen? The mercenaries will destroy everything." "But at what cost?" Lyra asked, her voice steady. "You are not just a weapon, Thalion. You are a good person, and you need to remember that. The sword will take everything from you, even the things you love." As he listened, Thalion felt a flicker of doubt. "What if I fail them, Lyra? What if I'm not enough without it?" "Then you fight with your heart, not just with a blade. You've always been enough," she replied earnestly. "You just need to trust in yourself and the people who believe in you." He looked into her eyes, searching for the strength he had lost. "You really think I can do this without the sword?" "I know you can," she said softly. "You just have to believe it too." As they stood in silence, the weight of the sword felt heavier than ever. Thalion was torn between the dark allure of power and the light of his father's wisdom, and Lyra's unwavering belief in him. That night, as he lay in bed, he wrestled with his conscience. Visions of destruction surrounded him, flames consuming the village, cries of despair filling the air. He felt the weight of his choices pressing down, and for the first time, he understood the true cost of the sword. It was not just a weapon. It was a choice that could destroy everything he loved. With dawn approaching, Thalion made a decision. He would face the mercenary leader, but he would do it on his own terms, without the sword's dark influence. He would fight for his village, and for Lyra, not as a conqueror, but as a protector. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village as the final battle began. Thalion stood at the edge of the clearing, the cursed sword gripped tightly in his hand. Across from him, the mercenary leader towered, his eyes filled with greed and ambition. "That sword belongs to me, boy," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Give it to me, and I might spare your life." Thalion felt the power of the sword coursing through him, a seductive force that whispered promises of victory. "I will never let it fall into your hands," he shouted back, his heart racing. The villagers watched from a distance, fear etched across their faces. They had seen what the sword could do, and they worried for their hero. As the two men charged at each other, Thalion felt the energy of the blade surging. He met the leader with a fierce swing, the clash of metal ringing out like a bell. He gained the upper hand quickly, pushing the mercenary back with a flurry of strikes. Each blow felt exhilarating, but deep inside, Thalion could sense the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. "You think you can control it?" the mercenary taunted, parrying Thalion's attack. "That sword will consume you. It craves blood, and you are feeding it." Thalion hesitated for a moment, the words striking a chord deep within him. He glanced at the villagers again, and his gaze locked onto Lyra's face. She stood among them, her expression a mix of fear and disappointment. It pierced through the haze of power, and for the first time, he truly saw the cost of his ambition. "Thalion!" Lyra called out, her voice rising above the chaos. "Remember who you are. This is not the path you wanted." The mercenary seized the moment, lunging forward with a fierce strike. Thalion barely dodged, feeling the wind from the blade skim past his cheek. He remembered the lessons his father had taught him. He had aimed to protect, not destroy. The sword, once a symbol of strength, was now a weight that threatened to crush him. Breathing heavily, Thalion stepped back, his mind racing. "Lyra!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "What do I do?" "Let it go," she cried, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You don't need it to be strong. You are strong enough without it." Those words rang in his ears, echoing louder than the clamor of battle. Thalion looked at the sword, its dark energy pulsing in his grip. He felt the souls trapped within it, their pain and suffering mingling with his own. The thrill of power began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of unease. In a heart-wrenching decision, Thalion raised the sword high above his head, the light of the setting sun reflecting off its blade. "I choose to destroy it," he declared, his voice steady and resolute. The mercenary laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the air. "You think you can destroy what has made you powerful? You are a fool." But Thalion understood now. The true power lay not in the sword, but in the choice to embrace vulnerability. With that thought, he brought the blade down with all his might. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the sword, a wave of energy that swept through the clearing. The mercenaries were thrown back, their ranks breaking as they stumbled and fell. As the light faded, Thalion stood there, breathless yet liberated. The sword shattered into 1,000 pieces, the dark energy dissipating like smoke in the wind. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he no longer had to carry. Lyra rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, Thalion. You chose the right path." He turned to her, a mix of joy and sorrow in his heart. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lyra. I almost lost myself." The villagers began to emerge from their hiding places, their expression shifting from fear to hope. Thalion looked around, realizing that they had all been waiting for him to find the strength within himself. He felt a new sense of purpose rising within him. In that moment, amid the chaos of the battlefield, Thalion understood that true strength was not about wielding power, but rather about protecting those he loved. And as he stood there, surrounded by the people of his village, he knew this was just the beginning of his journey toward redemption. In the quiet dawn following the battle, the village lay in ruins, but the spirit of its people began to rise. Thalion stood at the edge of the village square, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been a lively place filled with laughter and warmth. Now, the air was thick with the weight of loss and the promise of rebuilding. "Look at what we have to fix," Lyra said, her voice steady yet tinged with sadness. She surveyed the shattered homes and scattered belongings, remnants of the chaos that had unfolded. "It feels overwhelming." Thalion nodded, his heart heavy with guilt. "We can do this together, Lyra. We will make it whole again." As the sun rose higher, casting golden light on the debris, villagers began to emerge from their hiding places. They were weary, but hope flickered in their eyes. Thalion recognized the importance of this moment. He stepped forward, drawing the attention of those around him. "We have faced darkness together," he began, his voice strong yet gentle. But we are not defined by our losses. We are defined by how we rise from them. Let us rebuild not just our homes, but our community. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, and Thalion felt a spark of determination ignite within him. With Lyra by his side, he organized the villagers into groups. Some would gather supplies, while others would start clearing debris. Thalion felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders, but he welcomed it. He wanted to guide his people toward healing. Days turned into weeks as the villagers worked tirelessly. Thalion found himself in the forge again, not as a wielder of a cursed blade, but as a creator of tools for their labor. He crafted new tools and helped repair old ones, pouring his heart into each piece. Lyra often joined him, her laughter echoing in the forge, a sound that felt like a balm to his soul. One afternoon, as they took a break, Lyra looked at Thalion with a smile. "You know, I always believed you had the heart of a leader. I just never thought it would take something so tragic to reveal it." Thalion shook his head, feeling unworthy. "I made mistakes, Lyra. The sword, its power almost consumed me. I lost sight of what truly mattered." "But you found your way back," she replied, her gaze steady. "You chose to protect our village over your ambition. That is the mark of true strength." Her words filled him with warmth, and he realized that their bond had deepened through their shared struggles. Together, they were not just rebuilding a village, they were forging a new future. As the village began to take shape again, Thalion arranged a gathering to celebrate their resilience. The villagers came together, sharing food and stories, laughter mingling with the scent of fresh bread. Thalion stood before them, his heart swelling with pride. "Today, we celebrate not just what we have rebuilt, but the strength we have found within one another," he said, looking at the faces of his friends and neighbors. "Let us honor those we lost by living fully and supporting each other." Cheers erupted, and Thalion felt a rush of joy. He looked around, realizing that he was no longer just a young man burdened by a cursed sword. He was a leader, a friend, and a part of a community that had weathered the storm together. As night fell, they lit lanterns, illuminating the square with a warm glow. The flickering lights danced like stars, and Thalion found himself standing next to Lyra, watching the celebration unfold. "Do you think we can truly move on from this?" he asked quietly, uncertainty creeping back into his voice. Lyra placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We will always carry our scars, Thalion, but together, we can turn them into stories of hope and strength." Her words resonated deeply within him, and he realized that true redemption was not about forgetting the past, but about embracing it and using it to build something better. Thalion smiled, a genuine expression of gratitude and hope, knowing that with Lyra and the villagers beside him, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they were not just rebuilding a village, they were creating a legacy of unity and resilience. Share this story if you believe that community and resilience can triumph over even the darkest challenges. Leave a comment about a time when you found strength in unity, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales like this one.